Hello, everyone, and welcome to Mind Your Mental. Just a reminder that this podcast is not meant to be a substitute for a relationship with a licensed mental health professional. I know they are hard to find, and I get that. I have a bunch of resources on my website if you need them, but I am not your clinician. I am a psychologist, but I am not your psychologist. So if you need any specific help, please look for the help of a licensed mental health professional. Learn all you can learn from the podcast. Enjoy the episode. What's up, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Mind Your Mental. I am Dr. Raquel Martin, and I'm so happy that you have decided to join me today. So, today, I felt it was important to talk about Black identity development. Now, if you have been following me for a minute, you know that this is one of my specialties, one of many, one of my specialties in the realm of Black mental health, because I am a licensed clinical psychologist, professor, and scientist, and I specialize in Black mental health. But one of the reasons why I felt that it was so important to discuss it is because it's been coming up a lot with my students. One of the reasons I decided to focus on Black identity development in the first place is because when I was doing my internship and my postdoc at Johns Hopkins University, and I'd be working with patients, the majority of my caseload was Black. You can always share specific preferences you have for a mental health professional. And a lot of times people request a Black mental health professional. Like we in Baltimore, they would request a Black mental health professional. But there weren't many. There was only one other Black man psychologist when I was at Hopkins in my department. And I never got to meet him. Oh my gosh, I never got to meet him. But anyway, my caseload was often full of Black people. And I would have patients, adults as well as youth. I feel like with boys, it would be like this simmering discontent or frustration. And I feel like it would be the same with young women as well, but it would just often manifest different ways. With boys, sometimes a lot of individuals tell Black people, everything will be okay. Just drop your weapons and everything will be okay. And I always state that you can't drop your weapon when your skin is what is feared in the first place. So for a lot of Black youth, they see attitude and they see anger. And what they're actually dealing with is appropriate responses to racism related stress and constant hits to their Black identity. And if you're not able to build that up, you can never serve the Black community appropriately. Like I always state that you need to specialize in Black mental health. So I wanted to share what it was, because I think a lot of people can relate to the feelings that are attributed to having constant attacks to your Black identity and the impact that has on every single aspect of your well-being, and providing some ways that you also work on that. So, hey everyone, just a reminder that Mind Your Mental is not just a podcast, it is also a amazing community, if I do say so myself. It's phenomenal. I mean, you get more access to me. What more could you want in this life? So if you want to join the community, if you're not already on the community, go to my social media. My social media is the same, Raquel Martin, PhD, and DM me the word community so you can get details on joining this amazing flipping community. You get more access to me, y'all. Like, I'm a delight. All right. Hope to see you there. So bottom line, Black identity development is an incredibly important part of your well-being. Strong Black identity development is a protective factor against substance use and mental health difficulties and the impact of perceived racism. And it also contributes to the development of greater self-esteem and higher academic achievement and higher achievement in your work environment and just a strong moral development. And I want to clarify, a lot of times when people talk about development, they assume that we're talking about children. Black identity development, the way that you see your culture, is going to evolve your entire lifespan, because you are going to evolve your entire lifespan. This isn't something that's only dedicated to children. Things that build your Black identity development, this amazing core of your being, are having like cultural celebrations and seeing positive representations of people that look like you, having educational empowerment by learning more about your history, having access to mental health resources with people who practice cultural humility, being able to address and challenge stereotypes, because stereotypes, they're the fuel that keeps white supremacy going. Bottom line, the adultification, dehumanization, stereotypes, that's what keeps white supremacy growing. And I will always state that oppressors have and will always play the long game. They started this off with TV and film and books and even science. They've even published science back in the day that would support stereotypes that were it was wholeheartedly untrue. So it's not even science, it was pseudoscience, but since no one else was talking about it and no one else was dealing with it, it got seen as law, right? Mentorship. Also, embracing diversity and Black culture. I will always state that being pro Black means that I am pro Blackness, even if that Blackness does not mirror my own. And I always feel like individuals get that wrong. And I'm not going to say everyone gets that wrong, but I do think there's a wealth of individuals who feel as though if your Blackness does not mirror my Blackness, then I am not going to cape for you. And I always state that I am a womanist, and womanism has to do with supporting the Black community as a whole, he, she, and they, and also celebrating the diversity within the Black experience, because one of the things that contributes to the detriment of a Black mental well-being and your Black identity development is having to feel as though you have to fit into this box, this aspect of stereotypes. Like, that whole process is absurd, and it really breaks down the development of who you're meant to become. So we have the things that build Black identity development, and the things that break down Black identity development is expecting Black people to be a monolith, being in an oppressive environment, having a lack of representation, stereotypes, racism and bias, and systemic inequalities. Those are the things that are always going to contribute to you not feeling as though you can be whole. Now, if you want to research more about this, there are many models on Black identity development. One of my favorite models is the multidimensional model of racial identity by Dr. Robert Sellers, which also identifies a couple different factors. One of the most important things when you're thinking about Black identity development is understanding that racism related stress will always break down your Black identity. Racism related stress, or just the impact of any stressors, the impact of racism in the first place, going into the workplace. And I know that so many people talk about like microaggressions, but I really hate the way that certain labels just dilute what certain things are. Right? Like, people will say microaggressions and individuals may think it's not that serious. And I'll just be like, oh, that was racist. I think there are times when we get a little bogged down on just categorizing stuff, and it really takes away the salience of what is actually happening. Microaggressions, micro assaults, intentional, unintentional. It's racism. It's racism. You know, I just don't like that. I just don't like that. In the first place, it's one of the things that really grinds my gears. I've noticed it a lot with my students too. I'm teaching undergrad right now. I'm probably doing more grad stuff next semester. And I will always say it is amazing to be able to teach youth, because they humble me daily. But also because one of the reasons why I'm able to be so consistent with everything is because this is what I do, right? Like, I'm able to be plugged into the youth because I teach them and they teach me. And I think that's a benefit that more people need to understand, because we have so many people trying to say what the youth need. And I couldn't tell you the last time they spoke to someone under the age of 20. And it's kind of like, how you know what they need? When last time you talked to somebody in the community that you over here trying to advocate for? They don't even want that. They told me. They be like, how do you know? They told me. I teach hundreds of students a semester, and they told me that what you said that they wanted is trash, basura. They don't want that. Okay. But I've noticed it a lot with my students. So my students are very comfortable with me. Very comfortable with me. I like to provide a space to ensure that they're incredibly comfortable with me. I have snacks in my office. I got water. I got juice. I be trying to help their just trash palates. Let me tell you something. I brought in these artisanal donuts, y'all, like chef's kiss. Multiple flavors. These students talking about, is there no glaze? All I want is glaze. They ain't have Krispy Kreme. I say Krispy Kreme. These are 100-layer donuts. They were basically cronuts. Anyway, I was sitting there like fighting for my life. I said, y'all have trash palates. I just very much hope that you get the help you deserve. And I don't care what anyone says, Krispy Kreme donuts are trash. They're trash. Okay, I don't like them. The only donut I like from them is the cinnamon roll donut. They only have that on Sunday, and I ain't never been there on a Sunday. So I'm just saying. But I'm trying to help them out with their palettes, trying to help them do better. I'm trying to fix their music taste in the hip hop realm. But since they're so comfortable with me, they talk to me about a bunch of stuff. And a lot of times they mention, I asked them, one of our assignments was to discuss everything is linked to social justice. Right on? Right on. Everything is linked to social justice in my class. And one of the things I stated was we're doing hashtag activism assignment. And I said, what would you identify as like a hashtag for your generation? Like, what are things that you guys want to address? One thing they mentioned was that they feel very disconnected, which was so interesting to hear because, they have more technology than we've ever had, but they're like, yeah, but it's fake though. Like, nobody really cares about anybody. And another thing they mentioned is representation. They stated that, like, I don't feel like I'm represented. I don't feel like anything looks like me. How you gonna feel like you can achieve stuff when nobody looks like you who's achieving it? And that's really important to understand when it comes to the Black identity development because a lot of people think, most people think, the majority of people think, unless they have somebody near them telling them differently, most people believe that they can't achieve what they don't see. And that's why representation is so important. And that's why representation contributes to a strong Black identity development. But if you're consistently seeing people that look like you being harmed and mistreated and invalidated and dismissed, treated as less than human, told that they can't share their emotions, you're not going to feel like you can achieve that. And that doesn't just stop with childhood. It doesn't. These 30 under 30 lists and, make you feel as though if you don't achieve it by 30, it ain't going to happen. The way rap and hip hop is going, there could be like 50,000 Black men out here doing the dang thing in hip hop. But when it comes to Black women, there can only be one, and consistently putting them against each other. If you don't feel as though you can see camaraderie among Black people, if you don't feel as though you can see diversity among individuals of African descent, if you don't feel like you can see people, it doesn't even have to be a Black nerd, just being a nerd, just liking to read, not being ashamed of watching like trash TV. If you don't feel as though you can't have that diversity within your experience, it's going to chip away at who you feel as though you are. I always feel like, one, I got to stop saying always so often, y'all. I said, I always. I was doing a talk the other day and I was like, oh, we're talking about thinking traps and cognitive distortions, where I was doing a talk for my mind and mental community, which, by the way, love the community. It's my own mental health community for individuals, and we do webinars. And one of the things we were talking about in this one was what gets in the way of your success. It was like roadblocks to success. Cognitive distortions, also known as thinking traps. And I said, here are some cues to let you know that you're going into a thinking trap and you're using the word always or never. And don't you know what I said always like 50 flipping times? During that talk, I was like, yo, it's not the best move right now because the only thing I am always is Black. But the only thing I am always is Black. You get into this whole realm of thinking as though you can't be things. And I just believe that that's an issue. So when it comes to Black identity development, one of the reasons why some people feel these simmering feelings of frustration or angst or hopelessness is because who they are, a core aspect of who they are, is not being affirmed, and it's being denigrated every single day in the work environment, in the school environment, at home. One of the ways that I work with patients in Black identity development, like when we're starting off, is we look at the media they ingest. We look at everything because, when they say you are what you eat, I mean, what you read, what you watch, what you listen to, music, that's what you're eating, that's what you're ingesting too. And I make them do a cleanse, not like a cleanse like, you can only drink, what was that? Maple syrup, lemonade, and maple syrup, lemon juice, and cayenne. Not like that kind of thing. We look at everything that they ingest when it comes to media, books, film, music, the people that they're around. And then we break down, how often do you feel as though these people affirm the identity that you want to keep around you? How often do you feel as though they respect who you are culturally? How often do you feel as though these things degrade who you are culturally? How many times are you looking at TV shows and the characters that look like you are often treated poorly or being talked about? Reading books that don't center your experience at all, and when you do read them, they're just a funny sidekick. How many times does that happen? How many times has that happened for you? looking and listening to the music, and everybody is golly, like, just everybody is just a bee or a hoe or like all that. And these artists, and I tell them, like, why would you be able to feel good about your identity when everything you take in is designed to make you feel bad? Now, I'm not going to talk about, like, this is all the issue of the new generation of hip hop, because it's not. I'm gonna tell you something. If I'm getting hyped, the top songs I listen to most of the time, well, the top old school songs I used to listen to, were just misogyny with a beat. Misogyny with a beat, y'all. The producers were amazing. Okay. Like, I'm not gonna judge you for what you listen to, but I also want you to be aware of, like, there's a time and a place for everything. You also need to listen to some things that boost you up. That boost you up. So one of the first things we do a cleanse. Look at what you read. Are you reading? Are you watching documentaries? If you want to talk about Black identity development and building that up, one of the things that we do is educational empowerment, and you have to educate yourself to have educational empowerment. So I need to know the stuff that you are taking in. And typical signs that I have seen about individuals who are dealing with a significant amount of racism related stress, and it started to chip away at their well-being and their Black identity. The biggest signs that I see: powerlessness, traumatic stress, hopelessness, loss of identity, difficulty trusting others, lowered self-esteem, and then also isolating themselves. So when it comes to powerlessness, oppression will always steal your sense of feeling that you have control or influence over the circumstances in your life, often combined with feelings of exhaustion. And that will be compiled with the fact that you still have to deal with these racial prejudices and these barriers in your life. It's not only the fact that oppression has stolen your sense of feeling that you have control over your life, but you often have to you still have to go to work. You still have to go to school, and you still have to live in this world. So you're constantly getting beat down by that. When you think of traumatic stress, I want you to think about the emotional and the psychological and the spiritual strain that is caused by the exposure to racism and discrimination and oppression. They can include, and please remember, they can include direct experience, witnessing an experience, being repeatedly exposed to aversive details about experience. How many times do you see Black people being slammed to the ground or taking their last breath, or hearing about people being slammed to the ground or taking their last breath? The symptoms are always going to be aligned with post-traumatic stress disorder. There's also symptoms of hopelessness. The feeling that you are fighting against racism and bias and oppression, and you're doing it all the time, and it is a waste of time because you're being repeatedly exposed to injustices and stereotypes, combined with the lack of change overall. It's going to make you feel like things are a waste of time. It's going to make you feel hopeless. And you're going to have feelings of loss of identity. It's really difficult to reconcile your actual identity, who you see yourself as, with the negative stereotypes and biases that you're also being faced with, that are being placed on you because you didn't earn them. These are things that are just being put on you. And it'll be more and more difficult to remind yourself of who you genuinely are when you have to code switch or mask or sublimate your identity in order to be safe. Because racism and bias and oppression, these sever your safety. These are acts of violence against the Black community, right? And these kind of things are going to lead to confusion and self-doubt, and you're going to have a diminished self-worth. It's difficult to define what being Black means to you in a society where being Black is devalued. It's always going to be difficult to define what it means to be Black to you in a society where being Black is often devalued. When you are having hits to your Black identity development, you're also going to have difficulty trusting others. Because like I said, racism and bias and oppression and white supremacy, they're acts of violence against the Black community. And because of that, you're going to be constantly living in a state of fear, which is going to lead to distrusting others, especially individuals that are not within your ethnic group. You often feel the need to be hypervigilant. You have to read the room. People, European Americans and people that are not in the global majority really don't understand how much we have to read the room, because it can be life or death to understand how unsafe is this environment. Because racism and bias is going to make the environment unsafe anyway, but how unsafe is this environment? Do I have other people here that look like me? It's exhausting. And having to be hyper vigilant and not knowing who you can trust is going to lead to strained interpersonal relationships and also social withdrawal. You're also going to have issues with self esteem. You're going to be subjected to all of these stereotypes and degrading treatment. You're going to internalize that. And I want to be clear, it goes from injected oppression to internalized oppression, because if the racism wasn't there, if the oppression wasn't there, if the stereotypes wasn't there, that wouldn't be internalized in the way I'd speak to myself in my dialogue. So it's injected, which becomes internalized, right? You wouldn't have the medicine, you wouldn't have that flu vaccine if it wasn't injected into you. Correct? Correct. Wouldn't have this internalized oppression if that external messaging, the stereotypes, the dehumanization, and the adultification, the lack of representation wasn't injected in me. Amen. All right. Because a lot of times people are like, oh, it's internalized. Yeah, but where did it come from? Where do we get it from? Where did we get it from? Are we just internalizing air? Are we just disregarding every single positive message that's out there about us every second of the day and that have always been out there about us? Or are we picking up what y'all putting down? Most Black people have to dig to find positive messages about ourselves. And you got to dig through the trash of the negative messages to get to it. Right? And all of this is going to lead to isolation. It's going to lead to isolation. Having to deal with attacks against your Black identity and well-being because of racism, it's exhausting. And it makes you want to withdraw. It makes you want to withdraw. If you feel like others can't relate to your experiences with racism, with hopelessness, with the biases, with being degraded, you're not going to want to be around them. And this also comes up if you're not able to be around a lot of people of African descent. So how do you deal with this? Now, I state that it's important to ask yourself questions, because once you ask yourself these questions, you can address the answer in a certain way. So if I'm dealing with a patient and they are exhibiting symptoms of powerlessness due to the racism related stress and the attacks against their Black identity, I'll ask them, describe a time where you thought things were out of your control. And I'll also ask them the inverse, describe a time when you thought things were in your control. And discuss relationships where you felt heard and understood, and the inverse, discuss relationships where you haven't felt heard and understood. The amazing aspect of therapy is that you are having somebody on your team that's going to collaborate with you with the goals that you've identified. And this is data. This provides you, one, it builds comfort, it brings attention to an issue. You being able to talk about it brings it up, so you understand that it's safe to discuss. But you also learn more about the answers, because you don't know, sometimes you don't even know what questions to ask yourself. If there are times when you thought things were out of your control, and you have 50,000 examples of that, and you cannot identify the last time things were in your control, we need to talk about increasing that. If all the relationships you discussed were times where you felt misunderstood, and there are no relationships where you felt understood, we need to address that. We need to address that. And it doesn't mean always severing those relationships. It can also mean addressing those relationships where you feel unheard or misunderstood, and seeing what you're going to do next. If I'm asking about loss of identity, because loss of identity it breaks down your Black identity development, I'll ask, like, what is your sense of belonging to the Black community? And what is your level of access to that community? What is your level of access to communities where you don't feel like you have to code switch or mask? Because if you don't have access to that community, that's what we're going to tackle next. If you're dealing with traumatic stress, I'm going to ask, how often do you feel the need to be on guard about your surroundings because of your culture? And how safe do you feel in your community, workplace, or school? Do you feel safe in any environment? Because if you don't feel safe, you can't grow. Just like with loss of identity, if you have no community, you can't evolve. You don't need therapy to heal, but you cannot heal in isolation. And you were never meant to. If I feel like you're having difficulty trusting others because of this attack on your Black identity development, I'll ask you to describe scenarios or situations or environments where your distrust or trust is heightened. Where do you feel the safest? And where do you feel the most unsafe? Because I also want to know, how much time are you having to spend in these unsafe environments? If it's work, you're probably spending like 60, 40, 50, 60 hours. So you're being expected to heal in a foxhole. Now, this is a very old school term. I worked with the military for a significant amount of time. They used to have this term that was like, there's no atheist in a foxhole. But we used to also have this saying, as psychologists, of being like, you can't address your trauma when bullets still whizzing by your head. So if you're consistently in unsafe environments, you're not in an environment that makes you feel safe. It's understandable that you feel exhausted. You're constantly having to have your nerves on 10. If you're having issues with lowered self-esteem, I'll ask about like internalized messages or beliefs that manifest in your daily, day-to-day life, asking if your experiences with discrimination, racism, or oppression have impacted your perception of yourself and your abilities. And then we'll break that down, because once I know the messages, then I can help you tackle them. Once we identify the key messages, then we can find ways to address them. And then we'll also find ways to break them down. And then we can write those messages down. So when you have opportunities and experiences, and you will, that counter those negative messages, I'm going to bring them to your attention. Oh, you said you can never do anything right. And this is another example when you did something right. Oh, you said nobody comes to bat for you, but this is an example of when someone came to support you within your community. If you are having feelings of hopelessness, I'm going to ask, when's the last time you felt hopeful about the future? What was happening during that time? What has changed since then? What do you feel is your purpose of meaning in this life? What are your values? Do you feel as though your life lacks meaning? So we can tackle that. And if you're isolating yourself, I'm going to ask you how you feel about forming new relationships or connections. Is there a hesitance? Then I'm going to ask you whether this is due to fear, prejudice, or discrimination, or whether it's due to something else. If you're dealing with social anxiety, which is not only the fear of being around people, but the fear of judgment, we're going to delve into where that judgment might come from and help you work to combat that. And I'm also going to ask you to discuss the level of connection or distance or separation you feel from family or friends or communities due to your ethnic background. Because if you don't feel connected, why would you go to places that you don't feel affirmed? And how are you going to build community? And how are you going to work on healing? Because you can't heal and evolve in isolation. These are all the things that I would talk about. These are all the things that I would address. And now that you have listened to this episode, these are things that you can ask yourself and address. Right? Please always realize the issue is not race-related stress, it's racism. There's nothing wrong with your race or ethnicity. It's something wrong with racism. But you can overcome all of these. You have to advocate for yourself. You have to have the positive insight within your own well-being. And you have to ask yourself the questions, the tough ones. And I feel like y'all can do it. I know y'all can do it. And if you are a non-Black person listening to this, I hope that this has helped to educate you about all the things that we deal with daily. And I want you to think about how you can contribute to this world so that this is not what we have to do all day. So that we don't have to mask and feel the need to sublimate just to be in a world that we help build just as much as other people have. My podcast is not only for Black people. It will always center the Black experience, but I also want you to understand and take the time to learn and grow instead of expecting your close friend to educate you. There are resources out here that will educate you about things like this, and I'm one of them. So thank y'all so much for coming to the Mind Your Mental podcast. If you're watching, if you're looking at me, cheese. If you're listening, hey, how you doing? As always, I'm Dr. Raquel Martin. If you want to hear more from me, one, we have the other podcast episodes, but do you know who gets the most access from Dr. Martin? The Mavericks, my Mind Your Mental community. We the Mavericks out here, okay? Martin Mavericks. So if you want access to our monthly webinars, our monthly book club, our monthly Q&A, our worksheets that are solely for the individuals within the community, our podcast only for the community, where when I have guests, we ask them specific questions. We also do Q&A where people ask me questions and I answer those as well in the podcast. If you want access to all that in the community of like-minded individuals, head on over to my page, Raquel Martin PhD. DM me to get a link to access, and I hope to see y'all there. Have a good one.